liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir. Reading you loud and clear.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, go from.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 1st edition 2020 of Space News. This is Peter Aylward, and tonight I'm joined by Michael Abdullah and Angelo Dugazia, and we are all from the Space Association of Australia. Sad to announce, this is our pandemic issue of Space News, so let's get the show started. Rocket Lab delayed a launch because of the coronavirus pandemic. The company said last week its Electron launch from New Zealand, which had been scheduled for Monday the 30th of March, was postponed after New Zealand government issued new orders closing all non-essential businesses. The mission, called Don't Stop Me Now by the company, was to launch 3 NRO payloads and 2 University CubeSats, including one for UNSW Canberra Space. Meanwhile, Rocket Lab is continuing work at its US headquarters despite the pandemic. Work at the Long Beach, California site, with a significantly reduced number of mission-critical personnel, is considered an essential business. We're taking additional precautions to care for these team members, including physical distancing and increased cleaning and sanitation of our work environment, a Rocket Lab statement said. We're also working with our customers and local government authorities to minimise any potential disruption to our future missions planned in the months ahead. In recent years, we have placed an increased emphasis on delivering responsive launch capability to our customers, which means having launch vehicles and pads ready for rapid call-up launch capability. As a result of this approach, we're fortunate to have enough launch vehicles ready that we can effectively manage a pause in production with minimal impact on our schedule manifest. And it's over to Michael.
Thank you, Peter. Let's turn to the International Space Station. Roscosmos says the global coronavirus pandemic will not postpone the return of the current crew on the International Space Station. NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Andrew Morgan, along with Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Skripochka, are scheduled to return home on April 17, a little more than a week after a new crew arrives at the station. While Kazakhstan, home to both the Baikonur Cosmodrome as well as the landing site for Soyuz spacecraft, has imposed travel restrictions, Roscosmos says it is interacting with partners and considering options to allow launch and landing activities to continue as planned. And moving to US space policy. The White House postponed last week's National Space Council meeting because of the pandemic. The meeting will be rescheduled for a date to be announced. It offered no reason for the delay, but the chair of the council, US Vice President Mike Pence, is also leading the White House's task force responding to the coronavirus. And moving to NASA General. Half of NASA's facilities have moved to Stage 4, the highest level of response to the pandemic. NASA said last week half its 18 facilities, which include field centres as well as NASA headquarters and facilities run by field centres, were at Stage 4, which requires all personnel to work from home, with the exception of those needed for safety and security of the sites. Among the centres to go to Stage 4 are the Armstrong Flight Research Center in California, Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, and Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. Some centres have gone to Stage 4 after personnel were diagnosed with COVID-19, while others have done so because of growing spread of the disease in their communities or shelter-in-place directives from local or state governments. And turning to NASA's Commercial Crew program. NASA will participate in a SpaceX investigation of an engine anomaly during last month's Falcon 9 launch. The agency said last week its Commercial Crew program would be part of the investigation into the premature shutdown of one of the 9 engines in the rocket's first stage. The shutdown did not prevent the launch from successfully placing its payload of Starlink satellites into orbit on the 5th flight of that booster, but the first stage did fail to land on a drone ship. NASA said it is maintaining a launch of the Demo 2 commercial crew mission for mid to late May. But a botched Crew Dragon parachute test last week could also revise the schedule for that mission. SpaceX said a helicopter carrying a Crew Dragon parachute test article was forced to release that test article early when it became unstable. The parachutes were not armed at the time of the release and so did not deploy, and the test article was destroyed. SpaceX said it was not a failure of the parachute system itself because the parachutes never had a chance to deploy. SpaceX said last month it was wrapping up its parachute tests with only a couple left to perform before the system would be certified for flight. SpaceX said it was working with NASA to determine the testing plan going forward before flying Demo 2. And turning to NASA's moon program, SpaceX will adapt its Dragon spacecraft to launch supplies to the moon under a new multi-billion-dollar contract with NASA. Dubbed Dragon XL, the new SpaceX cargo capsule will service the Gateway, NASA's planned human-tended way station in lunar orbit. The Dragon XL will fly at least 2 one-year missions to support science experiments aboard the Gateway and astronaut expeditions on the lunar surface. SpaceX's President and Chief Operating Officer, Gwynne Shotwell, said, "Through our partnership with NASA, SpaceX has been delivering scientific research and critical supplies to the International Space Station since 2012, and we are honoured to continue the work beyond Earth's orbit and carry Artemis cargo to Gateway." Returning to the moon and supporting future space exploration requires affordable delivery of significant amounts of cargo, she said. The first of what NASA expects to be multiple awards under its $7 billion Gateway Logistics Service contract, the Dragon XL missions will help the space agency achieve its plans for sustainable mission operations above and on the moon, while also developing the capabilities needed for future expeditions. Meanwhile, NASA is seeking proposals for the production of a new main engine for the Orion spacecraft. NASA issued a request for proposals last month for the Orion main engine program to build a new main engine for the Orion spacecraft. The first 5 Orion missions will use engines originally built for the Space Shuttle's orbital maneuvering system. The new engines will be required to meet existing performance, interface and other standards for the Orion service module, rather than redesign the service module to accommodate an improved engine. An Aerojet Rocketdyne study recommends minimising the number of launches needed for an Artemis lunar lander and using storable rather than cryogenic propellants. The study, performed as part of a NASA contract last year, initially found that 2 elements landers with an ascent and descent stage, launched separately, were preferable to 3 element landers that required a transfer module in addition to the ascent and descent stages. Later work found that the best approach to achieving a 2024 landing would be to launch the 2-element lander as an integrated vehicle on an SLS, which would also eliminate the need for the Lunar Gateway for that initial mission. The study also recommended using storable propellants for the lander's propulsion system because of concerns about the lack of maturity of cryogenic fluid management technologies needed for propellants like liquid hydrogen. And over to Angelo.
Thanks, Michael. And let's go to NASA planetary and space science programs. NASA has halted work on the James Webb Space Telescope as it prioritises essential activities during the coronavirus pandemic. NASA has suspended work on integration and testing of the telescope at a Northrop Grumman facility in California, with agency officials acknowledging this will probably cause more delays for the mission. NASA is continuing to work on the Mars 2020 mission, which it considers a high priority because of its narrow launch window that opens in mid-July for only a few weeks. International Space Station operations and commercial crew developments are also being prioritised. Over to Europe. ESA is suspending operations of 4 science missions to reduce staffing requirements at its mission control centres. The 4 missions, Cluster, ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, Mars Express and Solar Orbiter, will be placed into a safe mode, with science operations halted to reduce the number of people required to work at the European Space Operations Centre in Germany. It allows ESA to use the remaining staff on higher priority activities like the coming Earth Gravity Assist flyby of the Bepi Colombo mission to Mercury next month. Across to China. China is proceeding with launch preparations for the first Long March 5B mission. The heavy lift rocket will carry a prototype new generation crewed spacecraft payload designed to be capable of deep space travel, including crewed lunar missions. Measures introduced to contain the COVID-19 outbreak have altered but not halted launch preparations, with a launch expected in the latter half of this month. The mission is also proceeding despite the recent failure of the Long March 7A, which shares commonalities with the Long March 5B. Across to commercial, SpaceX. The US Federal Communications Commission has granted SpaceX a license for up to 1 million user terminals. The terminals would be used as part of SpaceX's Starlink broadband mega constellation. SpaceX has disclosed few details about the terminals, although Elon Musk described them as a thin, flat, round UFO on a stick that can be simply pointed at the sky and plugged in. To Virgin Orbit. Like Rocket Lab and SpaceX, Virgin Orbit will continue work during the pandemic after being deemed essential. The company paused work at its Long Beach, California headquarters last week, with staff unable to work remotely to be paid in full. The company said its development of the Launcher One rocket with US government customers qualified it to continue operating after the 1-week pause. To Bigelow Aerospace. Bigelow Aerospace laid off its entire workforce last week, blaming restrictions caused by coronavirus. The company said it laid off its employees because of an order by the state government in Nevada, where the company is based, to close all non-essential businesses. Sources claim 68 employees were affected, and while Bigelow said it would rehire employees after the state order was lifted, many expected the layoffs to be permanent. Bigelow Aerospace was established more than 20 years ago to develop commercial space habitats using an expandable module technology licensed from NASA. The company flew 2 prototype modules in 2006 and 2007, with a third, Beam, currently installed on the International Space Station. Okay, back to Peter.
Thanks, Angelo. And satellite internet startup OneWeb filed for bankruptcy and axed most of its staff last week after failing to secure new funding from investors. The company said it would seek a sale, noting that financial market turbulence related to the coronavirus had sunk negotiations over an investment that would have funded its commercial launch. Our current situation is a consequence of the economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis, OneWeb Chief Executive Adrian Steckel said in a statement. OneWeb had been in talks with its biggest backer, SoftBank, to raise as much as $2 billion in fresh funding before the pandemic hit financial markets. And Astra cancelled a planned launch last week after its rocket was damaged by an anomaly in tests. The Rocket 3.0 vehicle was being prepared for a launch from Pacific Spaceport Complex, Alaska, when the company said it was damaged. Astra did not disclose the extent of the damage or when the launch might be rescheduled. Spaceport officials said they had activated an emergency response plan because of the anomaly, adding that no injuries were reported, but that an area around the launch pad was hazardous. And finally this week, scientists reanalyzing Voyager 2 data found something missed during the spacecraft's flyby of Uranus more than 30 years ago. A new analysis of magnetic field data from Voyager 2 detected an abrupt zigzag in the magnetic field, lasting just a minute, that was missed in the original analysis of the data. Scientists believe it's a sign of a plasmoid, or bubble of plasma in the planet's magnetic field, possibly containing gas extracted from the planet's atmosphere. And that's all it is this week. Thank you for joining us, and we'll speak to you again next week. Bye for now.